Okay. All right. Welcome to our philosophy discussion. Today we're gonna approach different subjects. Just take it easy, have some fun. Vladimir, you want to introduce the first topic?
Yeah, I would like to talk about axiology or the study of values. This week I've been studying this concept, and yesterday we actually had a conversation with Frank. He's going to be online tomorrow. I didn't have time to process it yet, but yeah, there are some concepts like normative ethics, applied ethics, descriptive ethics, and meta ethics.
Mhm.
So if you don't mind, we may just start, like talking about normative ethics and see where it'll lead us.
Sure.
Mhm.
Do you have a specific question?
Yeah, basically there's a distinction between, for example, normative ethics and meta ethics. That the first is focused on the question, what should we do? And it tries to, like it's prescriptive. It tries to tell us what things we must do and
Right.
why we must do them. So it basically tries to find some objective morality and impose it on individuals, let's say. Yeah, and meta ethics, it's about the question, like, why do we believe in right and wrong, and how do we know that this is like a good thing in the first place? Like the first, like, what should we do? For example, we should pay attention to certain things, or we should be good people. We should, we shouldn't kill each other. And this is normative ethics. And meta ethics is like why actually killing is bad, or why is being a bad person is bad. Applied ethics, it's about different fields. So we may take some, let's suppose, like yesterday we discussed engineering with Frank. So
You discuss what?
engineering, like the field of
Engineering.
engineering.
Right.
Yeah, and basically,
Okay.
well, we may talk about education, medicine, government, whatever. The point is like, what should we do in
Right.
relation to these fields? And it's less about some abstract ideas and more about what's like really going on, what kind of behavior. And I would say in the last descriptive, like this form of ethics, it's about just comparing people's views on morality, what's good and bad for them, and how they came up with certain sets of beliefs and values.
Right. So what's your question exactly? Like, do you have a specific question, or you just want to discuss the differences?
Well, I would like to ask you about normative ethics. Like, what do you think is like what should we do as human beings? Let's say.
Right.
And what's right and wrong, and we may immediately project it on meta ethics and
Right.
try to
So-
answer the question why exactly we should do this or that.
Let me just ask a question. I want to place this with what I know. When you say normative ethics, this is usually when you contrast deontology versus utilitarianism versus what do you call this?
Consequentialism.
Value, yeah, consequentialism.
Virtue ethics is the other.
Virtue.
Virtue ethics, yeah. Okay.
So we might just try to, like, I guess we discussed utilitarianism like before. I remember,
Yeah.
like we talked about some principles, but we might just try to take other schools of thought.
Right. Well, one thing I know is I think is that deontology is sort of like an incomplete theory, because if you go through, well, lying is wrong, just whatever, and eventually when you ask a person why lying is wrong, in the end you go down to utilitarianism in the end, but then you just arrive at a what you call this a simple rule that lying is wrong. Because if you keep qualifying, what if I'm lying to protect a Jewish family from being caught by the Nazis,
Murdered.
right?
Mhm.
Then say, okay, lying is wrong, except if you're trying to save a life, and so on and so on. In the end, it turns out, well, you're basically being a consequentialist. Then you just want go
Mhm.
on to, you just arrived at some rules of behavior that you think will help people who don't want to have to think things through. So I think utilitarianism has a leg up on deontology, because it actually forces you to think exactly why is something wrong. Although there are some problems with utilitarianism.
Is deontology mostly about actions? Like, is it focuses on actions and behavior?
That's the version I've sort of seen most of or heard most of, and maybe I'm misinterpreting it. But
Yeah,
I think probably the archetype of the deontology is like the Ten Commandments, where you get these set of rules, and it's almost like an algorithm which is interesting, because if you want to do ethical computer programming, you may wind up following a deontological model in order to do that, because you want to do rule-based stuff. But basically, it's a set of rules, and if you try to question the rules, the answer you get is shut up and obey the rules, generally from the gatekeepers of the rules. It's interesting that you bring up the bunch, because I mean, from my standpoint, I consider myself to be an eclectic pragmatist. So I think all the major theories of morality have their place, and actually which one you apply in any particular case, I think, depends on what the question that you're trying to answer is, because I think different questions activate different moral standards and need to be approached that way. So I'm kind of an oddball in that effect, in that I won't subscribe to any one of them, because I think all three of them have their place at times.
I mean, for me, I think the thing that has really changed the discussion about ethics is bringing biology into it, and that there are evolutionary traits that we possess, and maybe call it emotions or whatever, which is I think the basis of ethics. It's like, not just human beings, but animals some animals seem to have a built-in sense of fairness.
And to some extent, to answer the question about how do we know what is right and wrong? Well, we know what is right and wrong because that's how evolutionarily we have learned how to do things.
Exactly.
And what works and what doesn't. And what works is right and what doesn't work is wrong. And
one of the most controversial points is that sometimes you're doing something and it benefits you, and at the same time you may choose to do something else which doesn't benefit you but benefits society. And sometimes you're in a situation where if we're talking about utilitarianism, so it's like you're doing something good for the world, and if it's good for the world, it doesn't mean that it necessarily will be good for you, and vice versa. Sometimes it may be like the opposite. And what exactly would you do? How would you decide which kind of behavior?
And the answer is always, we decide the best we can, right? Because we don't know what the correct solution is going to be, and that's kind of a looking ahead to the consequentialist argument is, okay, if I do this, what is the effect going to be on myself and others? That's pure consequentialism. And at times you rely on what you think you know internally. And to me, that would be a virtue ethics approach, is this is what when it comes down to the fundamentals of I believe this is right and I believe
Right.
this is wrong.
Right.
That's virtue ethics. Now, the thing is, though, in actions, you may do something that is wrong, but it has to be done. Like,
Mhm.
I think killing is always wrong. I think killing other people is always wrong. If I'm a soldier in a war, I may realize that the results of winning and losing the war outweigh my personal belief that killing is wrong. And under those circumstances, I could kill,
Right.
even though I know it's wrong, because I know this other thing is even more wrong. And that's where axiology and value theory come in, is it isn't just a simple right and wrong,
No.
because once you got decisions to make in complicated situations, which one is more right and which one is less right? That's
Yeah,
it's not a simple clear cut anymore.
Yeah,
sometimes it's intuitive, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
you have time to think about it, and it's interesting to see how the
Right.
amount of time you dedicate to thinking about it influences your
Sure,
actions.
it goes back to Kahneman, right? Do you
Yeah.
think fast or think slow?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Thinking
Now,
fast and
the
slow.
thing is, even if there is an evolutionary origin of our moral instincts, the thing is that our biological evolution is much slower than cultural evolution. And so, as a lot of people say, our moral instincts are really from 200,000 years of hunting and gathering. And society is just a lot more complex than that now. And so our moral instincts are not sufficient. That's why we need the cognitive, that's where our cognitive abilities come in. You try to analyze this situation now in complex society and bring it down to levels where our moral instincts can then say, yeah, in the end, yeah, that's wrong. That's how you decide that, for example, global warming is not something that in the end, it's a moral issue, whether we should address global warming or not.
Certainly has a great moral component, right? Because
Yeah.
you know that the people who are going to be most affected by it are people who have been largely ethically shat upon
Right.
throughout history anyway, right?
Yeah.
People in the equatorial and
Exactly. You know,
and the tropics.
and people who have not been born yet as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And what standing do they have? And that's an
Right.
that's a very interesting moral question, is what
Yeah.
standing do the future generations have and what obligations do we have to them? Because I believe we do. I believe that's
Absolutely
part of my internal system says, yes, I have a duty to future generations to provide them with a planet that is less messed up rather than one that is more messed up. And how can I do that?
Mhm. No.
It might be interesting to ask, for example, as for me, I view it on a kind of personal level. So, for example, to protect global warming, I'm not going and trying to convince everybody that you have to do certain actions, or you have to whatever react against this. I'm trying to I'm trying to use I don't have a car, so I try to not participate in certain activities which enhance it. And basically, it's like it's not escaping the problem, but it's like this is what I can do, and I'm trying to be aware of what's going on. So instead, I know maybe it makes sense to kind of force other people to do the same, but I guess like it's very hard if you just superficially familiar with the topic. It just try to force it, to push it. It's like, at least for me, it looks very I can see how can I do that. For example, I know that if I want to really focus on the issue, I have to study it like at least for a couple of years to understand what's really going on. And it's very hard to persuade people, for example, to pay attention to global warming if you do not study, if you do not really know what's going on there. And to know that, it requires like a lot of time to understand what was the problem. Simply like using some waste materials, or trying to make less trying to make less garbage.
Mhm.
And yeah, on a personal level, it works kind of well, but on a social, I'm not sure, because I see often, for example, when there are some people who try to push it very hard, and like not always, but sometimes these people, they have very little understanding what's really going on. So they can kind of make a business out of it.
Right.
It's very popular. You go on YouTube, you see that people pay attention to these issues. You make some videos where you try to advocate that we should do this, we shouldn't do that. But finally, it comes out that you're just basically making money using this issue as a trend.
Mhm.
And I don't think that this is a good approach. And
No,
it's,
we call it grifting is the term that we use. And there are a great many of, unfortunately, YouTube and Patreon and Medium type of publications that are just that and are grifting. And that's where our philosophy is defense against the dark arts comes into play, is we got to be able to separate the wheat and the chaff here, what is useful information and what is propaganda type information that's being, or propaganda or something being sold to make a buck. And that's hard to do. And that's why we study, but philosophy is hard, and that's why we study it, is in order to be able to cope with these things.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an important knowledge, and like about to know about your environment and what's going on. And I would like to ask another question, like about some knowledge. Actually, this one of the questions which I ask myself, like what kind of knowledge do we have which has value? Like not nowadays, for example, maybe some skills or something that is very important to know, and like what it can be, what is the most valuable knowledge that we may have?
It would depend how you define valuable, right? Because that can mean a number of different things. What's valuable to you? I mean, it's
Yeah, but that's exactly what I'm asking. Like we
but
all
it depends
have,
on your objective. It depends on your objective. So you're asking like in absolute terms,
well,
like
maybe not.
what's the most valuable thing in the world? It's a difficult question in absolute terms.
Yeah, what kind of knowledge has more value than the other knowledge? Like, for example, this environment issue, it definitely has certain value. And for example, there may be other issues which it's important to know. And in philosophy, there are lots of topics, and philosophers argue through ages, like what really counts as knowledge. And I guess we all have some kind of intuitive sense that this information or this knowledge is more valuable than another type of knowledge. And that's what I'm trying to, like, for me, for example, when I was thinking about it, I came up with an idea that awareness of your death is valuable. So when you know that you are mortal, it has certain value.
Right.
The knowledge of your ignorance has certain value. When you know that that you don't know, this famous Socratic
Sure.
knowledge. For me, determinism has a great value. Like I would count it as one of the most important.
That I only know that I know nothing, or something to that extent.
Right.
Maybe we don't need to go that far necessarily, but this ability, I think that's one of the most valuable pieces of knowledge, I believe, that a person can have, is that for you to have this ability to understand that you don't know things.
Right.
Usually you talk to stupid people, they know everything. Like in their mind, they know everything. And that is really like a clear sign that you're talking to a stupid person, because very, very few intelligent people think that way. It's very rare. Like maybe they think that way because they're super arrogant, and fine, there are some people like that, but it's rare. Usually it's a stupid person you're talking to.
I think you reached real awareness when you get to that point where not only do you know that you don't know things, but that you don't know about things that you don't know about. That is, that there are so many things out there that you haven't even been exposed to yet, that you don't know about them. And there's the quantity of that is so huge compared
yes.
to the little bit that we can actually say we know something about. It would overwhelm you if you didn't realize that, you know, it's that way for everybody, and that's how things are, and, you know, deal with it. I guess the pragmatist says deal with it.
That is one thing certainly that when I, you know, made this conscious effort to educate myself even further and just start reading, starting with, you know, the old, and that the more I learn about things, the more ignorant I feel about, you know, and I just let my readings bring me to, you know, so yeah, the more you know you don't know. And
right now, knowledge is kind of like sliding along the event horizon of a black hole, and you find yourself being sucked into the singularity. And of course, the singularity is zero. Right? That's where we're all headed towards.
But one thing I've come to sort of a conclusion is, you know, I started reading. The first thing I did, I said, I'm going to read Plato, and then just started reading whatever's connected from that. So I got into evolution, I got into all the different fields, neuroscience, and started reading some more about physics. And the one thing I've realized or observed is that everything is connected. That for me is my one big observation about knowledge in the world, is that everything is connected.
And the area of study that talks about that is systems theory. And so that is an important piece of knowledge right there. And one that's going on in my head a lot these days is thinking about those interconnections, because in science, right, what you learn in science is reductionism. You learn about breaking everything down to the point where you can understand these very simple models, because the very simple models are the only things you actually can understand. But real world stuff is complex interconnections of it. And that's a fairly modern area of study, was starting basically with 20th century biology.
Right.
And that it's an area of extreme interest for me. So if there was one piece of knowledge that I would say, you know, I'd want to pass on to those kids who wind up surviving the climate change thing, is remember everything is interconnected. And whenever you change one thing here, you're going to change something else over there, and be prepared for that.
Yeah. And it's just that ideas in different fields. And I'm made me wonder, I think people, you know, there's so much knowledge out there, and the academic system is that to succeed in academia, you really have to focus on one field and come up with that's the only way to come up with original knowledge, because it's so vast now. It can't be like you can't be a Darwin or a you know.
Nope, you don't get tenure if you're a Darwin.
And so you have these narrow fields of specialization that hardly talk to each other, and they're missing certain things that are mentioned, for example, in psychology, that hey, something like that is going on here in you know, all the different fields.
No, and the part that kind of irritates me a lot is not only do they not talk to one another, but some of them take a great deal of pride in not being understandable to people outside of their very narrow specialty. And that just chaps my ass.
and then they look down on people who want to try to get a more general view, and then say, oh, you're so. That's not real science. That's, you know,
you're a dilettante is the term that you get. I've heard that one a time or six in my life.
Right.
That's why it's a very interesting question, because now you have so much information on YouTube, and not just on YouTube, on the internet, everywhere. And what you value, like your values determine what kind of information you will get. And then finally, like if you try to analyze, like I view it as, no, there's some hierarchy of knowledge. So whenever I watch some videos or whenever I read some books, I'm trying to understand how it fits to this hierarchy. Like, is it really important? Does it help me to understand different fields? How many fields? How, you know,
And that's a good thing, but sometimes in your head, what you need to do is you need to kind of invert the hierarchy,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
if you take
Yeah.
it and you rotate things and look at them from a different perspective, you realize that the hierarchy that was there can be very easily changed into
Yes,
something
it's not.
else.
It's not rigid. It's not like you have
Not
a
at all.
hierarchy,
Yeah.
and
And people think it
psychology,
is, though. People think it
ph-
is, and it's
Yeah.
not.
philosophy
And
is on top. Psychology,
yeah,
it's like science,
no, that's
whatever.
No,
I've
nothing is on top, and that's a
yeah,
really horrible sexist metaphor that was probably thought up by, in the 18th and 19th centuries, the same thing that gave us Kant saying, the Chinese and the Africans aren't
right.
capable of doing philosophy,
Yeah,
because he was a, right,
yeah,
white bigot fuck.
Yeah, I like the idea of Gestalt psychology, the idea of figure and ground. And here we have, like, for example, in terms of our needs. So we have different needs, and every time one of our needs is the figure. And then if this need is satisfied, it goes to the ground, and another need pops up and becomes a new figure.
Mm.
It's
Mhm.
like, remember this example with rabbit and duck.
Right.
So
Right.
if the ground is one, like if you view it as a duck, there's difference between figure and ground. So one
Mhm.
time figure becomes ground, another time ground
Right.
becomes figure.
Right.
And when you think about these hierarchies, it's not just there's one thing on top. Yeah, probably used like unsuitable metaphor, but usually it's like one thing comes up and it captures your attention, it holds it for a certain moment, and then it just it replaced with something else. And the point is to understand how different things really hold your attention. And sometimes something pops up and it doesn't want to go to the ground back. It wants to stay forever here and determine all your behavior, all your thoughts, all your basically everything.
So another valuable piece of knowledge I would probably want to make sure is preserved is probably what Michael is doing exactly right now, which is geometry, or in general mathematics in general. Because when we talk about these things and how they all relate to one another, it turns out that mathematics is the language that we invented to talk about those kinds of connections and relationships, and it's really good at it. At least better at than anything else we've invented for it. So that would be an area of knowledge I would hope we could preserve as much of as possible, because people will be able to make use of it in any circumstance, right? In geometry, I mean, geometry was invented by ancient Babylonian farmers to basically be able to measure their land, so the other guy didn't come on and take part of their land. It was basically accounting is how a lot of early mathematics was developed. And
writing as well was
yep.
started as accounting, basically to keep track of what the monarch owned.
Yep, let the pharaoh know how much taxes have been paid to him this year.
That's the amazing thing about when the cuneiform writing started out as an accounting system, just to list down what the king owned. Sure. And the same thing with what you call this, Crete, the ancient.
Oh, right. I know.
Yeah, with Linear B was the same thing.
Yeah, but then somewhere out of all that, suddenly we get Gilgamesh.
Yeah.
Exactly. And how does that spring up from a bunch of accountants?
Yeah. Well, because it wasn't sudden. I mean, but right. To just come out from there, it's amazing. One thing I don't know if I'm changing the topic or not, is we have to drop this assumption, and it seems to be, I'm not going to just say it's the Europeans who started this assumption that people in the past, or even extinct species of hominins, are by default stupid, and they need to prove that they're as smart as us. And that is something I think that is a perception that people have today. Almost all people have today that oh, those people from the past, or maybe these other people are stupid. They're not,
Right.
and we need to drop that.
Right, and that's how you get things like aliens built the pyramids and aliens built Stonehenge and stuff like that, because clearly those poor ignorant slobs who were living back there would be incapable of those kinds of feats of engineering. And guess what, guys? No, they were capable. They did it.
They just didn't build up as much as a stock of knowledge as we have now in the 21st century, but they
knowledge like sediment is sometimes cumulative. So
knowledge is cumulative. That's what
everything else.
But their cognitive abilities, I think, are
we overestimate ourselves greatly. I think is what it comes down to. We really do, even versus other animals,
right?
And even versus plants to some extent, we overestimate ourselves.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that bothers me, but I bother easily, I guess.
Yeah. So, I mean, Vladimir, is that more or less does that more or less cover some of the topics you wanted to discuss, or do you want to ask a different question in terms of the values thing?
Well, there are lots of questions which can be asked, but we may move on and just touch on intelligent people. Like we may connect this topic to this idea. I see there's ambition, intelligent people.
Yeah, I mean, we don't need to stick to those topics. I'm interested in this question of the values. Like, to me, it's it's really difficult to determine. It's hard for me to wrap my head around the fact that some things are wrong and some things are right, because I feel that that's hard to justify. It's hard to prove to someone that something is right and something is wrong. But at the same time, you can't live your value and have a value system without having a notion that something is right and something is wrong. So you're kind of like, even if you're a skeptic like me, that can't, you can't justify, like that something is right and something is wrong. You're still drawn to the situation that you need to have values and you need to figure out what's right and what's wrong.
Yeah, there are actually several schools. We may touch on like three popular schools, like moral objectivism, which basically states that there are subjective values. So like we may discover them in the world, and then everybody has to subscribe to these values, and they are not dependent on your opinion. So if this subjective value, and I don't know how, like they have their own methods of reasoning, and in Wikipedia it says that 56% of modern philosophers, and it counts in American philosophers mostly, are moral objectivists. So they believe that there's an objective value which is independent from whatever everyone thinks. Then we have moral skepticism, which is there's no objective value. It's basically all up to us. And another school is ethical subjectivism, which is close to moral skepticism. But moral skepticism, it's basically denies that it's possible to find these values in the world that we create. Like it basically opposes to moral objectivism, whereas ethical subjectivism, it states that there's some values, and some of our individual values, they are also maybe true for all people.
Right. No, I certainly believe that there's no such thing as values up there that in all contexts this is what's good and bad. I don't believe that good and bad exists in a vacuum. It's always relative to a social or societal context. What is good and bad, but
that's also problematic though, because you can talk about, because that would be a neat way of putting it, and I mean, you can try, but I think there's a real problem when you get to like German, not Nazi Germany, for example,
Oh,
like
yeah.
that's like societies like that have values that are very strange, and that
Mhm.
it's hard to to say, well, it was okay to put the Jews in the concentration camps. I mean, you can try to say that,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like, for example, I don't believe that, like I don't believe that it was okay to put
Oh,
those people in
no.
concentration
Yeah.
camps, right?
There's certainly those people who were put
So
in
that this
concentration.
kind of disproves the whole theory that it's also, that theory
The
doesn't quite
subjective, yeah.
hold.
Oh, yeah,
You
yeah.
But
know?
there
I
are
mean,
definitely many.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm not saying that values or good and bad is totally devoid of any, but what I'm saying is that you cannot talk about it just out there in whatever, some
No, I
dimension,
agree. I agree.
that you have to really, and the problem really is not, I think the problem is really not determining what is good and bad. It's the problem is how to get people to live next to each other without, and somehow reconcile their different notions of what good and bad is. And it doesn't mean that we will all we should just tolerate each society's determination of what is good and bad. It's also saying, and no, we don't agree with that, and we're going to do something about it. And that's just hard to do. I mean, you can't come up with a set of hard and fast rules about how
yeah.
to
I guess
arrive
I
at
guess
that.
it's
You know?
basically what makes us individuals, like different value systems and different beliefs. And if we just assume that there should be certain values which we all have to share
Right.
and follow, basically we'll
Yeah.
have a society where everybody is going to be like, in 1984 or whatever, everybody
Yeah.
is equal, everybody does the same
Yeah.
thing, and there's no progress. Maybe it's going to work for a certain period of time,
No.
but then finally there's, I don't know, maybe it will work, who knows, maybe
I
it will
don't
be in
know,
the
but
future, maybe it will be in the future that something like Nazi Germany, like,
sure.
will be globalized, and there will be just one group of people, or maybe it won't
Yeah.
be even people, but some, cyborgs or some kind of different life form.
I mean, it still goes down to what I believe. I believe it goes down to our built-in evolutionary moral instincts. That's basically the root of everything. That's what tells us, yeah, I have nothing to do with your country, but I think it's bad that how you treat women or how you treat children. And certainly as now it doesn't seem like it affects me, but that is certainly something I object to, and I cannot just stand by and not express objection to it. And we can't have what do you call this, normal discourse between our two societies, as if that's not this big elephant in the room that we object to. And the problem is how to live in a world where there are people who are doing things that you find morally objectionable, and to what extent do you
Well,
intervene?
well, let me ask you this. Should we go sort of like the Platonic route and see philosophy as partially philosophy as a way to develop ethically sound individuals, or is that just misguided?
No, I absolutely believe in that, to get people to think more about these things.
Yeah, no, me too.
Although there's an interesting family of studies that were done. I know there's a philosopher by the name of Eric Schwitzgebel, and he's in one of the California universities, but they did a study on ethics, and they compared, they sent out questionnaires and all that kind of stuff, and they compared professors who specialize in teaching ethics versus professors in other fields. And the results of their survey was that the people who specialized in teaching ethics scored no better than average on their actual ethical actions and standings versus the larger academic population that they tested it against. Now, admittedly, it's a limited sample size, and who knows how the questionnaire may or may not have been loaded. But I find it very interesting, and it's been repeated to get the same kind of results, that professional philosophers who teach ethics are no more ethical than the next person, basically, is the conclusion.
Right.
And what
Yeah,
does
well-
that tell us about, does philosophy help make ethically better people?
I would like to add to that. I've been reading Nietzsche since 2013 quite a lot, and Nietzsche is considered one of the this craziest guy, immoralist, who basically denies all moral values and kind of moral nihilist. But when you study his about his life, about his behavior, he was one of the most innocent guy in the world. Like he taught immoralism, but in his life he was like the saint, like a sage in terms of he never offended anybody and anything. Like kind of counterexample, like philosophers who teach ethics may be like as ignorant in their behavior as those who just do not have anything to do with ethics, but philosophers who may teach immoralism in their real life may be like exactly different, exactly the opposite type of humans, type of follow exactly the opposite type of ethics.
Yeah, there's a practical component to ethics, so it's not just about teaching it or reading it, it's you have to, and I believe that was something that was understood, with the Greeks, it's not something, it's something that you learn to live that way, and it's something that you need to apply in your life. If not, I mean, there's no real point. You can talk about ethics, and you can try to develop theories and all that, but as far as going into the being an ethically sound individual, I mean, that's something that you need to practice.
Yeah, and there are some interesting ambiguous cases about that from the ancient, and in particular, I'm thinking ancient Rome, and in particular, I'm thinking of Seneca, who is a very well-respected philosopher who was also one of Nero's chief consultants for much of his reign.
Right.
So you always see these kinds of trade-offs that get made in real life versus the theory that gets espoused and written down, and versus what people actually do. And I guess at some point we just need to accept that, that's how people are.
Right.
And, I'm that way, and I bet all of you are that way, and I bet the other people who were going to come and didn't join here today, they're all that way. And, it's the human condition.
Exactly.
In defense to Seneca, I would say that Seneca finally
Killed himself, didn't he?
committed
Yes.
suicide
Yes,
because
he took
Nero
took the open door, as
Nero
the
ordered him
Stoics like to say. Yeah.
Right.
to kill himself. And it's very the point is that even though Seneca could be Seneca was the right,
I think. Yeah.
Seneca, okay.
Yeah.
So even though Seneca could try to make an impact on Nero, still we see that you teach somebody ethics, but in the end they end up
in the end, if you can't teach a sociopath ethics, right? If they don't feel it, if they don't feel any sense of sympathy.
Aristotle and Alexander the Great.
Right. Or even Marcus Aurelius, you read his writings and think, oh, this is such a very humanistic perspective. And then meanwhile,
as long as you're not a German,
he's
great.
Yeah, that's true. He's conducting, basically ethnic cleansing.
Yep.
Oh, well, but that's the thing. We can't give up. We just have to keep on trying.
Yeah, you may
Right,
teach
yeah.
yourself. You may become a virtuous person basically by following certain principles and trying to be a good person. But
Yeah.
when you like when you deal with another person,
Right.
it's quite often happens that you try to influence somebody to help them to become virtuous, but
Yeah.
as a result you get the exactly an opposite
Right.
result.
And for me, when I try to study and read about ethics, the first feeling I get is that I am not living up to the ideals that I claim I believe in, and it's always a constant struggle to live up to what you think is your ideal self, and that's
It's
part
it's
of
not easy, right? It's not
yeah,
easy to
that's
live up to when you live up to try to live up to hefty ideals, to high ideals. I mean,
yeah,
that's a lot harder than not trying to live up to them.
right,
That's a hard way to live.
yeah,
So it's not necessarily easy.
yeah, but
and
yeah,
and this is where your whole examine life thing comes into play, right? Is that you stop and you think about it at the okay, maybe at the end of the day, and reflect on, okay, what did I do today, and what did I do that I thought was morally good, and what do I think did that I thought was morally less good, and how
right,
could I have done it better, and how will I try to do it better next time it occurs? And that is the self-reflection that the whole Socratic method talks about, is that you know you're going to make mistakes, and you're always going to make mistakes, but you need to think about your mistakes and you need to
yeah,
learn something from them.
right,
And
no,
also sometimes this an ideal version of yourself also may be dangerous
Mm,
in terms of instead of analyzing your behavior and, as you correct say, just reflecting on what's going on, you try to judge yourself that you do not fit to your ideal. So instead of really analyzing your character, understanding what's going on in reality, okay, I'm not as good as I decided to be, and then you try to force yourself to change, but it leads not to the change, but it leads to you become worse and worse.
yeah,
So you
right,
have to
because
be
when you
very
do your reflection, part of what you reflect on is, is that ideal that I'm trying to reach really the right ideal I should be trying to reach, or can that ideal be improved to better reflect who I am and how I fit in with
yeah. And
the
why
people and world
why do
around
I
me.
have this idea in the first place? Like
Yeah,
was it projected by somebody else, or like
almost certainly.
how did I come up with this ideal? Like what
Right.
what made me think
Almost
that
certainly you were taught that ideal by somebody else, probably when you were a child. So,
Mhm.
yeah.
It's hard to determine that, but that's also like the mission of philosophy. If you're studying moral philosophy, is to determine what are those ideals, right? What are the things that make something good and right, if there is something good or right. But even just figuring out good from wrong, I mean, yeah, like think, yeah, it's it because usually people don't do that exercise. So in philosophy, you do that exercise, and it gives you different perspective, because usually people get that from religion, but religion is a lot more normative.
right,
There's no real discussion, right? So or reflection, because you're just told what you need to do.
Well, there should be if it's done right, because even raised as a Catholic, I mean, we had periods where we would do individual prayer, and that's where you contemplate your sins, as it were, and
Sure.
figure out, what you did wrong and what you could do differently.
mhm,
Although the standard, of course, that you're trying to meet is somebody else's standard,
somebody else's standard,
and
yeah,
that's always a problem when you're trying
Yeah,
to
there's a
meet
pretty
somebody
clear
else's standard.
code of what's wrong and
yeah,
what's right, in religion usually. Certainly in
yeah.
Catholicism, but also in other religions.
Well, I would say with what's acceptable and what's not, rather than
What's
wrong or
acceptable
right.
and what's not. I mean,
But
a lot of things are defined.
I'm just being facetious. But yeah.
But in philosophy, you kind of like need to figure that out. You kind
Yeah,
of need to figure that out. You need to read and you need to discuss.
right.
Like those things are always to be determined.
Yeah.
and then you go into the next stage of trying to live up to those ideals. But in religion, usually you don't even go through that first stage.
No.
You're giving the package, right? This is your package. This is right. This is wrong. There's two columns. And
yeah, but one thing I wish about people who are very religious and really believe in whatever the moral precepts of their religion. I'd like to ask someone, what if the head of your church or your sect or whatever suddenly does an Abraham on you and says, okay, tomorrow you have to go, maybe not kill your oldest son, but do something really, really awful, or something that really changes the moral precepts of your religion. Will you stay with that religion? And I bet a lot of people will say no.
So do you go to the compound and drink the Kool-Aid, or do you suddenly start strapping bombs on yourself and going to your neighbors and becoming human explosives? I mean, right, it happens, right? All those things happen. So there are people who say yes to that question. I will do that.
Yeah.
And isn't that scary? Isn't that frightening?
Yeah. And there are some people who don't.
Well, sometimes it's enforced as well, with the Inquisition. I mean, it was enforced, right? So it's not like you could say no.
Yeah. But for those who don't, then I would tell them, did you just not make a moral judgment on your own, not based on your religion? When you did that, when you said, oh, okay, I don't want to be with this religion anymore. I don't think they're and so people do have the ability to make moral judgments. It's just that they don't want to most of the time. They just want to, I said, Aristotle said man or people by nature want to know, or said all people by nature want to know. I said, that's not true. All people by nature want to believe. And it's only some people who want to know and want
to the X-Files theme here.
They just want something to believe in, and if it's something that somebody dictates to them, I'm fine with that. Seems okay.
Well, it kind of goes back to what we were saying before, right? You need to have those guidances, because you cannot. At the end of the day, nobody can live without that guidance,
right?
Like it's just not something you can do. So I think that's why it's very useful for society to have those moral, guidelines, because everybody's going to need them at some point.
Yeah,
but I mean, most days, really.
And then probably that's what was needed for society to get organized and to be coordinated and to be able to for us to be where we are now, where we have all these.
It's not just religion, right? I mean, there's stuff like law, social rules. There's but there needs to be a determination of what's okay and what's not okay in society.
Right. And the society says, as long as it's not too egregious, we'll go along with it.
But then
the point is, like, now we mostly are, like, we learn it not from laws or from philosophy or even from religion. We learn from pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we were kids, we just watch movies, we read some fairy tales, and then this is the way how I should behave. And then finally you find out that in real life and in movies or in fairy tales, it's like two different fields.
Yeah, I feel like, we're a generation of kids raised by TV, right? There's that quote, but now it's not even TV. Now it's a generation of kids raised by social media, and YouTube. But it's it comes down to more or less the same.
That's what's also interesting, like for example, having YouTube, it's an opportunity for you basically express all your ideas and express your values, try to do something to make these values. Like if you study philosophy, if you're interested in certain ideas, if you think that they have value, you basically may kind of fight with stupidity simply by trying to express these values as clearly as possible.
The
And
problem is that, like it's not so much YouTube. YouTube, I think, is okay. Yeah, YouTube is big, but there's I think a lot of kids are actually on TikTok and
yeah, yeah.
on
Well, you may
on
go on TikTok as
Instagram.
well.
So it's certainly not just YouTube, Vladimir on YouTube reflecting about life. It looks a little bit different than that.
Yeah, but still,
No,
like
no.
there are lots of platforms. I do not
I
deny
think
this, but
I
you may,
don't
you may,
have I
you may
don't
use
have
all
as
of
much a
them.
problem with YouTube as I do with Facebook, though. But I guess when you say YouTube, it's the whole thing. But yeah, uh,
Well, and I mean, I think, when you go to TikTok and Instagram and, like dating
Right.
apps and all that stuff, I mean, there's a whole ecosystem that keeps
Yeah.
developing every day.
yeah,
And I think, yeah, that is like, we're not really living a life with no technology anymore. I
No.
mean, everybody's like really like kind of deep into this stuff,
Oh, yeah.
like
Yeah.
deep into this technological life. And that
Right.
has also changed people's values.
yeah.
And I think people are still figuring out those values.
No, every time technology changes, brings these types of big changes to society, then we have to think about again what does our old system or of ethics and morality, how do we interpret it now, or to bring it up to date to help us guide our actions in this new, more technologically advanced world.
Which always brings to mind the ultimate horror scenario is what if the power grid collapses?
Mhm.
Because without power, you got no technology of any functional
Right.
kind.
Yeah.
And what will people do? What would a generation that has never seen anything natural,
Yeah.
in a sense, what would
I
they
think
do?
that would be great. That's not going to happen, but I think like
That'd be great.
we're like it's hard. Like
Well, it
even
may
though there
happen
are,
in places. It may not
Yeah.
happen everywhere, but it may happen in places.
yeah, I guess you never know with climate change. There's all sorts of terrible
Apocalyptic scenarios. Yeah.
apocalyptic scenarios that you can think of. That but I don't know. That's speculation, but it could happen. Could happen.
Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand your values, and especially when we talk about subjective morality or subjective ethics. So it's not actually, because instead of trying to find some common values, which again do not exist from the point of subjective ethics or moral skepticism, you try to build your own system of values. You try to understand your behavior through analyzing why are you doing certain things, why you value certain type of content, certain social networks like YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok,
Right.
etc. You try to integrate them together, try to see how they affect your behavior.
Sure.
Yeah.
Now here's one question I've always, when societies decided, well, maybe not all societies, when people said, it used to be that we thought of other races as a different species beneath us, and so it's perfectly ethical to treat them, to enslave them, and and then when the idea came that we are all the same, we should not treat people of different skin color differently. Is that a moral evolution that basically was triggered by science, by the study of biology and evolution?
There's an excellent chance that is largely the case, sure.
Yeah.
Because the more we biologically look at one another, the more we realize biologically how close together we all
Right.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it also was a very powerful idea in terms of creating this new world, getting from feudalism to modern era.
Right.
And if we consider kind of objective morality, I wouldn't say that it's absolutely true that you have to treat your neighbors and all people in this way. It's basically what helps us to develop better societies, but it doesn't mean, like in moral objectivism, they say that this is an objective truth. And this is one of the problems, because when you think in that way, you basically try to establish a certain standard and you establish it not because we need this standard to develop our societies, but because you say, okay, this is objective truth, this is, you know, God commands, this is whatever, like you can't question it. And the problem then becomes that some people who have power, they basically develop, like they parasite on this idea. So they try to like use it to manipulate other people. And that's where most of the problems appear.
And it's part of the reason why I no longer believe in things like objective truth or objective morality. What I see as objective is if you take all the subjectives and you represent the whole thing as a bunch of Venn diagrams, objective is the overlap between them. And what you'll find when you look at objective is there will be people who don't overlap with the main objective part at all.
Yeah.
And that there will be things in the main objective part that I personally don't buy into, that people say this is the objective truth, and I'll look at it and say, no, it's not.
Yeah, but there are universals, like for example,
are there?
The you know the prohibition or prescription against killing people for no reason at all.
So if I live in a society that's cannibalistic, and
no, for no reason, you know, they have
at all.
When they're cannibalistic, they do have a mythology or whatever you call it that justifies it. But I just want to kill him. Period. There's no reason. I think all societies have that prescription, but it probably comes from, we have to stop that, because I could be the one who's a victim of that, you know, random pointless killing. So maybe, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
but
the point is overlaps there, but I bet you wouldn't find a complete overlap.
Oh no, never. I mean, there are sociopaths, of course, who just think, it's perfectly fine.
But there seems to there seems to be an intuition that people have that they should not kill other people just for the fun of it or just for the sake of it. You know, there seems to be that intuition, and it's not the only intuition that we seem to have as a species. You know, maybe there aren't that many things as we think there might be, but there's like some, you know, and I think that's one of them. And maybe that's just biological. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just it seems to me like the problem with this whole science stuff is that it detaches you from your humanity, right? From the human experience. Because I as a human, like, I want to believe that I'm a little bit more than like a chimpanzee driven by some biological instincts and drivers, you know, and evolution and all that. But, you know, maybe that's all there is. I don't know. But I don't want to believe that, you know. Maybe we don't need to believe that. Maybe we can understand that there's a biological aspect to us, but at the same time, we're not a chimpanzee, right? We're not a monkey or an ape or an elephant or a fly, you know. Like, there are different degrees of how animals evolve and their consciousness evolves. Like, we have an element that is also civilization that, you know, changed us. So maybe we are not just those biological things anymore. Maybe, you know, that civilizational part is also a part of us.
Yeah, maybe fish have civilization too, and we just don't know how to recognize it. You watch
maybe, but I can't really say.
A fish colony behave, or that flock of starlings that do those magnificent maneuvers in the air and make all those wonderful patterns. If I were an alien looking at that, I would say they're showing signs of intelligence and maybe signs of society. But as
I mean, they're intelligent to a certain degree. I don't think they're as intelligent as humans. I think, you know, it's not.
But humans always overestimate themselves. Humans always and always have overestimated themselves, and we got to be careful of falling into that trap.
But there's a difference. I think it's fair to make that difference between fish and human. I mean, they're not exactly at the same level of development, even though we do overestimate ourselves.
They're not the same, but just because they're not the same does not make it inferior. Right? Different does not equal inferior.
I mean, it depends on what you consider inferior. But my point is not that it's superior or inferior. My point is that there's another element to it. It's not just the biology, it's also something else that we created as people that have a civilization.
Yeah,
Right.
and which has value for you, right? And
Which has value, which
yeah,
might as well have, you can argue that, like I think this is a
Mhm.
very
like
arguable
is it
point.
yeah, that's the question. Is it
But I
objective
think,
value or
yes, I think that might be certainly something.
and how much of it is determined by like your environment and by the certain time we're living in right now?
Yeah.
Like what you call human. Like I would say that probably a few hundred years ago we were not completely different creatures, but our modern technologies and ways of communication, our modern language, and all the things which are going on in the world. Like for any person 200 years ago, it would be insane just basically to observe all of
And
this, to
if you go
understand all of
if you go
this.
back 20,000 years, right? I mean, we probably
Yeah,
weren't
it's
all that
just
different.
it's
We were pretty
unbelievable.
similar physically, but we were very different in terms of who we are as people.
Yeah, I would say we were like chimpanzees.
Yes, we're very close.
On most part, societies
Yeah, for the
were
most part.
society. There were no societies. Just some tribes where
Exactly.
you have
So
like
let me
100,
run
200
something by
people.
you though, with that 20,000 years. So if you brought someone from 20,000 years ago and brought them and dropped them in today, they wouldn't know on anything about what the hell is going on, and they'd probably wind up going nuts and committing.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like a dream.
One
Like,
of
for
But
example,
what if you brought an
dropped us
infant?
20,000 years back?
Yeah.
What would we do? What would we modern superior
Right.
types do to
Sure.
survive?
Probably
You
get
wouldn't
eaten
be
by
able- you-
get
you
eaten by a
wouldn't-
tiger. I'm pretty sure.
you wouldn't be
answer.
able to do anything because your
No,
language
sure.
would be different, and
Yeah.
you it's like the same as communicating to dogs, for example.
Mhm. No, but what if you brought an infant from 20,000 years ago and raised it today? Then
He would probably be normal.
He'll
Yeah,
be fine. He or she will be fine.
he or she will be probably fine. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
The
the question of
question is-
social influence, right? How
Yeah.
our
Yeah, that's what
societies
shows us, right? That's what shows
Yeah.
us that social component does changes, like
Right.
quite dramatically.
Yeah.
Although
Yeah.
that's a thought experiment, and thought experiments aren't always what actually happens. So you
No.
got to be a little careful about going down that trap too.
Sure.
But
We can make the assumptions, but it's not a hard assumption to make.
Yeah.
it isn't.
I don't think so. I mean,
No.
is there any data that we were like dramatically different physically, like our biology or brains were dramatically different 20,000 years ago? I don't think so.
No.
I think the
As far
structure
as I
was
know,
about the same.
we were probably shorter and hairier.
Well, yes, but
Yeah.
other than that, that has to do with nutrition as well. Not just nutrition, but it does have to do with nutrition and medicine. Like
Right.
kids
Yeah,
now,
different-
they get vaccinated. That's why they
In my
live so
case,
long. That's kind of the reason.
drinking dairy products from cows that have been given growth hormones and things like that. When I drink their milk, each generation we get a little bit to do that stuff.
Yeah, there are some fears that it all started with like all this industrial era started from the moment where Europeans got sugar, like
Mm.
this
Yeah.
idea that there's
I
sugar.
mean, in archaeological digs and in fossil, no, they're not fossils. They're just dental tooth decay was hardly existent in among hunter gatherers, and it's after agriculture that they found skulls with rotten teeth. And so
in terms of social values and certain like objective values, yeah, for example, now we have 8 billion people and
Yeah.
like different types of social structures, but before we had like 1 billion 100 years ago, and probably what works for 1 billion people doesn't work for 8 billion. Maybe in the future we'll have 100 billion people, or we'll include animals in our what we call this animal rights movement that
Mhm.
we should
Sure.
treat animals as
Sure.
we treat ourselves.
yeah, the
And,
circle of empathy is what some people are saying.
Yeah.
How the
Yeah, and
people
for it's going to be a totally different society. Like it's like we had master and slaves, then we decide, okay, we all are humans, but now we may decide, okay, we have animals and we eat them, and basically they are our slaves in some sense. But then we may decide, okay, let's include them in our circle. And
Yes.
what's going to happen after that? Maybe we'll have like 100 billion, population where just 50 billion people and 50 billion animals, and they have like, maybe some kind of relationships, which now even considering the possible. Maybe we'll implant some technologies. For example, we may take artificial intelligence, put it in dog's head, and dogs may talk, and dogs may understand and may tell you something about his life. Use our language, and it's very interesting to see how it may work.
No, but going back to the notion of our circle of empathy, I think even today we really need to expand that to the whole planet now, to all living things in the whole planet. I think we need to expand that today, because that's, I think, is the main mental obstacle to addressing climate change. It's just that people don't care enough about the rest of the world, the planet. It's just us, me, my family, my community, my country, and it's not enough anymore. We have to think really of a lot of the welfare of a lot of other, not just people, but beings on the planet.
It brings us back to the old question, like, of the boundaries of self.
Right.
Like, what do you think is the self? Is it you? Is it your family? Is it your community? Is it the entire world? Is it like the whole universe? Or is it nothing at all? There's no self.
I wonder if the pandemic is also going to change people's perception a little bit, because the pandemic has, I don't know if it's going to go back to the way it was before, but we certainly have become a global species in the last, not 2 years, but, almost. And it's like we're all in this together, right? Like the pandemic has put everyone on the same boat, and it doesn't really, the countries are not really that relevant. Everybody has it. Some countries have dealt with it better than others, but at the end of the day, everybody's like in the mess.
Mostly it put us on the internet, right? So most of our
put everybody on the internet. It put everybody like on the same footing. People are like, everybody can relate to each other at this point, right? It doesn't really matter if you're in Asia or if you're in North America. I mean, everybody like can kind of relate. Oh, this is going on, or in Europe. Everybody has a very shared experience.
Sure. I mean,
I don't know if it's going to go back to the way it was before, but certainly right now, I think we have a much more global understanding of things.
I mean, could you find a better illustration of everything is connected than the pandemic right now? And immunologists and epidemiologists were saying you cannot treat your country ahead of the rest of the world, because if you are not making these vaccines available to poor countries, to the third world, then the room for more mutations is going to you're giving room for more mutations by allowing it to run rampant in the third world. And guess what? What we have now is
and I take along those lines, I take slight issue with your talk about the internet there, Bruno. Internet is available and all the people can join in on it who can afford to do so. And there are a lot of people on this planet who still can't afford to do that. And even part of the recent US infrastructure bill, part of what they brought there was bringing internet to rural communities in the United States, because the people there can't afford it, and they're effectively cut off from this discussion that that we're able to have, and to some extent we've come to take for granted now that we can do that. But there are still plenty of people who can't participate, and they're part of the world too. They're part of the ecosystem, and we're all part of. There's a thing called the Gaia hypothesis that I do not fully subscribe to, but it is the notion that the entire planet is a living, breathing ecosystem. And to some extent, there is some truth to that. I don't
Right.
think it's, I mean, to some degree, it's kind of been turned into a religion by some, and I think that's going too far, obviously, with the notion. But the idea that the Earth is all a developed, connected, dynamical system where every change in one part affects all the other parts, yeah, absolutely. It's how complex systems work, and we're just starting to figure that out. Finally.
And some Gaia's proponents even say not an ecosystem, but an organism.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think of it as a valid metaphor at the very least.
It can be, sure.
Yeah.
It can be it can certainly be a useful metaphor.
Yeah. But that's where we are now.
Yeah, what do you guys think about, for example, like specific values, like friendship, for example? That's the one that I've been thinking about, for example. Like, is there such a thing as, like, can we define friendship? Can we define what's a good friend, what's a bad friend? Or does that, like, how subjective is that and how objective is that? And I know it's always going to be a mess because, of the normative problems, but if we go the route of trying to determine what's ethical, sound or not, like, can we do that?
Aristotle says amicus furor temporis, which means friends are the stealers of time.
Really? So no friends. So Vladimir has a very clear notion.
No, it's not my view. It's
Aristotle's view.
Yeah. I'm citing the
Man,
classic.
I don't know if
philosopher.
Aristotle was very fun to hang out with.
Well, maybe he was. No, it's an unfair thing to say. I won't say.
Yeah, I guess it's first we have to define friendship, like what it is, how it works. Because for somebody, just an acquaintance, it's a friend. For another person, like, it's very, like, somebody has hardly one or two friends.
Mm-hmm.
And as for me,
it's true that some people can't make friends, and then other people have perhaps way too many friends.
Yeah, as for me, I would define friendship as a relationship which actually lasts for quite a long time and doesn't require any, like, I would say I have some friends with whom I communicate once a year or once half a year, and have a relationship for, we know each other for 20 years or something like that. But they do not bother me. I do not bother them. I don't try to impose my values on them and say, you have to study language, and
they don't steal your time. They don't steal your time.
Yeah, but we can see each other, like, for example, as I said, once a year, once half a year, just have good conversations about what was going on the last year, to spend, an evening together, and then don't see each other for another half a year. Don't bother each other unless it's something. Yeah, unless there's something, like recently, for example, I was on funeral of it was my friend like 15 years ago, but then we didn't talk for, like, we hardly see each other 5 times after that.
Yeah.
And but this guy was killed in a fight accidentally.
Wow.
And he was of my age, like around he got 40 this year. And and there were lots of people, I mean, whom I knew like 10-15 years ago, and basically they called and said, there's a funeral. And I saw people whom I didn't see for 5 years, for 7 years, but still there's kind of this friendship, that this kind of idea of friendship. When you know people, you may communicate with them, but it doesn't mean that you have to communicate with them every day, every time. Like, this is my definition of friendship. It's basically the relationship which lasts, which that you have certain people whom you can connect in special situations, but basically the point is you do not bother each other if everybody does their own way, their own things, and would not try to confuse each other. That's, I guess, the point, or manipulate each other. And I guess it's very it's very vague, but I can't find anything better now to say. It's kind of my intuitive way of thinking about it.
I guess, yeah, my kind of crude, quick and dirty definition of friendship those are the people who I choose to spend my time with versus the ones that I am required to spend time with, or the ones who I don't spend any time with at all. Which to some extent means that I consider what we're doing here to be something of a friendship relation.
Sure.
Of course, yeah.
Spend my time with you guys, and there's a reason for that, and it's because I consider you friends. There are friends that I consider.
I like your definition. Strong definition.
Friends that I would choose to spend more time with, and some I might spend not as much time with. But that's how I know if it's someone I want to spend time around, they're going to be a friend.
Yeah, and I guess also like common experience. Like, for example, in this case, when we have conversations, and these conversations are like the experience which we have, which we share, and which we may like not just discuss, but participate in something. And like the more experience you have with people, and if it's not forceful experience, as you say, correct. So if you really want to do that, this kind of friendship, whereas if you communicate with people just because you have to do that, that's just because you meet them at certain places where you accidentally interact with each other.
Right.
Just acquaintances. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
For me, one thing about friendship is that it's people that you like to do things for and who like to do things for you. And the depth of the friendship is basically how much are you willing to do for that person. And there are friendships that are deeper than others, but yeah, basically you're willing to do something for them, and hopefully they're willing to do something for you. And
it's very close to love, right?
Yeah.
Love.
Yeah, I mean, friendship is a type of love. It's not
love is a lot more difficult to define.
It's not a romantic.
That's the problem with love, because you can mean. I think you can mean a lot of different things by love, right?
Yeah, but you also can mean a lot of different things by friendship.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think like what Raul is saying is true. You can love your friends, right?
Right. But it's not a romantic love.
Exactly. It's not a romantic love when you love.
Well, maybe.
If it is, I mean, I would say that's.
I remember romantic love is a relatively late entry into the field, right? It's a medieval concept. But if you go back to Socrates and the Symposium, where he kind of sets out the different types of love there, classically, I mean, that, if I remember right, he did a pretty good job of delineating different types of love and where they where you have one and where you have a different one.
Yeah, but
I mean, it's certainly the Greek definitions are famous, but I would agree with you, Raul. I mean, I like Craig's definition actually, but that's more like a straightforward definition and a very clear definition. I think it's very unassailable, that definition, Craig. I think that's very clear cut.
It is, but it will be different from person to person, of course, right?
It will, but it's a very good one. It's very strong. Yeah. But I view friendship more as like what Raul was saying, I think it's more like a legal contract in my mind. It's like you have sort of obligations. They're not written down, that's the difference from a legal contract. But it's you are obliged to another person to a certain extent. Like you have to act in certain ways towards them, and they have to act in certain ways towards you. There's to me, loyalty is the defining characteristic, I guess, in that relationship. and that would be the defining characteristic. That's how I see friendship. But it seems to, yeah, our different visions, I guess, not necessarily different visions, but different definitions
They're
illustrate the
just
fact that
different.
you can,
Yeah.
yeah,
How
you
about
can approach it in different ways.
how about equality? I guess among philosophers, it was always this the point of dispute. Like you can be a friend with somebody who's not equal to you, to some extent.
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Hmm.
I don't know if I would agree with that though.
I suppose.
Why do you think that?
Well, in terms of like giving and taking. So
Right.
if you're like you can't actually give like make friends with people whom you can give, who have everything, and you can
Right.
make friends with people whom you can take from, because it's going to be unequal.
Yeah.
But also, it's not just about giving and taking, but in general, if we think about relationships, it's, for example, suppose that you're a smart person or highly intelligent, and there's somebody who is stupid. Do you think it's possible to have friendship with a stupid person? Like you may say, yes, you may say, okay, there's some, let's suppose it's a good person. It's a stupid good person, and you want to be friends with him, but you will not feel like really comfortable in these relationships. You may impose certain, categorical imperative and say, I'm going to treat this person this way. But actually, in real life, you'll see that there will be some disconnection, and it's very,
Sure.
it will be it will it, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but it will be very hard, and then you'll like you may end up just regretting this relationship in the first place.
Well, I would say is that there are close friends and there are friends that are not as close, and maybe you might not, that person might not be your closest friend because you can't talk at certain levels with him or her, but certainly I can see I can have a friend who can be much smarter than me or much, and you know
It's interesting that
it,
you say that because in my life, some of my very closest friends have been animals. And they're right. I think based on our earlier discussion, we would
right.
say animals and humans are not equals, although I probably disagree with that personally. But hey, some of my closest friends are animals, and I
Sure.
will go out and talk to my dog.
Sure.
Every time I go out with him, I talk to him and I watch what he does. And after a time, I think he's talking back to me. Whether he is actually or not is, subject for speculation. But
Sure.
But I think so. I think, and I think I understand what he's trying to tell me. And,
Right.
he's trying to say, throw the ball now, Craig, and things like that.
Well, I don't think you're wrong, Craig, but that's why people say, the dogs are men's best friend, So, I think that's because we can establish that bond with a dog that you can't really establish that bond with any other animal, maybe a cat. But you're
Well,
not.
there are people who have done things with like bears and like horses and like a fox.
Maybe a horse,
Correct.
yeah, as well.
Yeah.
But a
dolphins,
bear,
bears. Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are people
Are you
who
sure?
have raised bears from when they were orphan cubs, and yes, they have very, very dog-like relationships with those bears that they've raised.
Well, can I go
What's
back
interesting-
to this thing about friendship among unequals? And I just want to throw this in that, it's always been said, and I've seen it, that the one way to ruin a friendship is to hire your friend to be the boss of your friend in a work setting. And that's why they say never, never, ever work for your friend or have your friend work for you, because that's surely one way to if not change, but to ruin the friendship. So there is some currency to that you cannot have true friendship if you are on an unequal setting. That's why when I have a relative who's a CEO of some company or at least high ranking executive, and when she says that, oh yeah, I treat my subordinates really as my friends, and say, I think you think you are, but I don't think your subordinates are think of you as a friend, because when they're being nice to you, it's because you are controlling their paycheck.
Yeah.
And the things that you think they're doing for you out of the goodness of their heart is really affected by the fact that you control their economic fate at the very least.
That's the interesting thing about friendship, though, is that I think when people say friends, they don't really, they mean like people that I'm friendly with or people that I get along with.
Right.
It's not. I think you make a good point. That is not a friendship. Yeah. And I think it kind of like reinforces Vladimir's point, because it's not, there's an interest behind it, right? And certainly there's not a equal footing.
Right.
And I mean, a good leader is not really friends with anyone that he leads. I mean, that's kind of like military rule, like
Sure.
basic leadership, because you can be friendly and they can respect you, but that's different from being like if you're on the equal footing with someone, right? I mean, they're not gonna take orders from you,
right?
Especially if things get crazy.
And especially
so it's that simple.
As you said, in a military setting, you are not going to ask your friend to charge up the hill, the machine gun.
You're not.
You're not.
True.
In fact, if you might even say, "You stay here, I'll do it."
Yeah.
But if you are,
and if you did, you probably wouldn't be a good friend, right? If you send your friend like in a openly dangerous situation, like, because I think that's kind of like violates the covenant. Right. So you would, like, personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable. That's why, you can't have friends that, you're leading into battle, like necessarily.
Yeah.
So as usual, I'm going to be a little bit contrarian here. And my example, which is a fictionalized example based on an actual incident, is an American film called Glory. And it's about the one of the first Black regiments in the American Civil War, and the various dynamics that go on within those groups have both the military authority aspect and the friendship aspect, and people do both, are able to blend those two, but they recognize the difference, right? They recognize when someone is doing something in the role of, say, Colonel Shaw, when he's being Colonel Shaw, but then the character that is played by Denzel Washington in there, who is basically illiterate private, who's in there, they actually become friends and confidants by the end of that film. So I think you can do both. I think it's possible, and I would not consider them mutually exclusive. I mean, I've had several bosses who I have been pretty decent friends with. My first one out of college, in fact, we used to like to spend time together, and he was, probably 25 or 30 years older than I was at the time. And we would actually sit and we talked math, because that was our background together. So we took our shared interests and we built a friendship out of it.
Right.
But I could tell a difference between that role and the manager employee role. I mean, you can tell when,
I think that's the key, right? If you can tell that difference, and if it's clear, then you can do it. But if you can't, then I don't think so.
And it is usually clear, though, if you work at it and you look for it, I think. I mean, there are some people who are in a management position who become, power drunk, and those are the people you would choose not to spend much time around if you can help it. But so I think it varies a lot from person to person.
Sure.
I won't make universal generalities about stuff like that, because they'll bite you they'll cost you. They'll prevent you from taking an opportunity to make a friend, maybe, where you can, and it can be a very helpful and good friend for both ways. And you don't, because you're trying to respect some kind of a hierarchical power dynamic that is in fact artificial in a lot of ways. Anyway, I'll shut up now and let you guys talk.
No, that's
No, I think you make a good point. I think it really complicates things, but if you can accumulate the roles, it's not impossible. I think you made a good
Right.
case for that.
Yeah, and I would, always, it's always at the end where there really are no universals. We can only talk about what's most likely to empirically more common, and even with for example, there's this author, his name is Joshua Green, and he did neuroscientific experiments in relation to the trolley problem. And he would make statements like, this is what this is what people's instincts are. And then he shows the number and he says 70% or 80% of the people would push the button, right? And then he says that's what basically the norm. And yeah, that might be the norm, but there's still that 30 and 20% who don't think that way. And we cannot just dismiss that and say those people don't count. And so, yeah, I would always qualify that when we say this is how it is, that it's, maybe it's the way we think. We can't really think in terms of continua, but rather just discrete categories. Yeah.
All right.
I guess we always have to remember that people are all different.
People are all different.
Yeah.
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 These are, anyways, complicated questions
Yeah,
anyway.
and even when we say that people are like this, we're not really saying all people. There's,
Guys, maybe we can more or less end it here if you're okay
Yeah.
with it.
Sure.
Yeah, we've been talking for a while, but do you guys want to bring something else up before we go?
Just, enjoy the holidays for those
Yeah.
of you what
Oh, yeah.
celebrates them. Enjoy the holidays for those of you what celebrates them. And
Yeah.
in Minnesota here, we can enjoy our little bit of snow that we got today.
Yay.
My dog sure loves it.
A little taste of normal weather.
Snowy Minnesota is back.
Yeah. Oh, one last thing, since we were talking about, how we tend to overestimate ourselves relative to animals. There's a book I read, and I don't know if you've read it. It's by Frans de Waal, and he's a primatologist, and it's Are We Smart Enough to Know How Smart Animals Are? And I would recommend that.
Yeah.
Let me just.
He has an amazing TED talk with chimpanzees.
Yeah.
Yeah, DeWald's book about the bonobos is very
Yeah.
interesting too.
Yeah.
Nice.
There. Are we smart enough to know how smart
Yep.
animals are? That's
Are we not? Okay. So
Yeah.
yeah.
That's a very nice book. I like Frans de Waal.
Mhm.
Nice. Good recommendation, Ron.
Mhm.
All right. So that's it, guys. Thank you.
All right.
I'm gonna end the
Okay.
recording at
Over.
least. Thanks for listening.